What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, 2018 award winner in the innovation category given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And you know what I always say? You're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. And we have some friends that are back. We have Kenneth Braswell, CEO of Fathers Incorporated, and we have Lawrence Wilbon looking suspicious, I've
Right.
been told. He's on mute right now, but he's being suspicious
Right.
tonight. And the reason that we're on, let me just give a little background here. According to a report on men's fertility and fatherhood that was released in 2014 by the U.S. Census, there are 8.2 million Black fathers in the United States. It's hard to fathom all of these dads are absent. However, what is the societal narrative would like you to believe? That's what they'd like you to believe. 2020 marks the 55th anniversary of the 1965 Monahan report. And for those who have not read that report, you need to read it. Doesn't matter where you are, it's still very apropos today. The controversial report argued that combating poverty required strengthening families in the United States, particularly through the positively impacting Black men. The 2020 census provides an opportunity to ensure that Black dads and their families are represented properly in the count of U.S. citizens. So tonight, we're going to have an epic conversation talking about Black Dads Count, an initiative that Kenneth, Lawrence, and others are spearheading in regards to getting Black fathers to be counted in the census. So we'd like to welcome both of them back to the Dr. Vibe Show. Gentlemen, how are we doing this evening?
Thank you so much. Doing great. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It is also my pleasure. I know Lawrence is on mute, but we know he's there. Lawrence is there. Lawrence?
It's good. It's good to be here. It's always a great time to talk with you.
Always a pleasure to share with you. And I'm always leveled up after conversations with either one of you or both of you. So I know the trajectory is just going to keep on leveling up. I appreciate it. So Kenneth, you represent a great organization called Fathers Incorporated, and it may be the first time that our viewers and listeners are hearing about it. So can you give a little background of that organization before we get into the Black Dads Count initiative?
Sure, absolutely. We began as an organization in 2004 with an eye towards looking at custody, visitation, and child support. The organization was birthed out of my own personal struggles with the system and the mother of my youngest daughter. And then as I began to kind of look at the work, I was already in social service work. I was the vice president of the Urban League of Northeastern New York. It was already in 15 years of doing that kind of work. But as a result of that situation, began to start looking at fathers, began specifically looking at Black men, but quickly realized that those issues of child support, visitation, and custody were just symptoms of larger issues, primarily unemployment, incarcerated backgrounds, conflict resolution difficulties, communication or lack of communication with the mothers of their children, conflict resolution, and other things they were struggling with that led to having difficulty with the systems they were entangled in, and decided at that point to get out of the direct service business and get into the capacity building and professional development business to really help service providers and practitioners around the country understand the nuance of working specifically with men. So 15 years later, we continue to do the work. In addition to doing the work on the ground here in Metro Atlanta, we are also the prime contractor for the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, to which we've been providing services under that contract now going on 10 years. And so we are happy in the way and ecstatic many times in the way that God is using us as a body of work to include fathers in the paradigm of families and to make sure that they are also equipped, supported, and inspired to be the best dads they can be. You're on mute.
Myself, my error.
There you go.
How involved in this wonderful organization?
Well, about 2 years ago, I moved to the Atlanta area, and I had probably 3 or 4 individuals told me I need to meet Kenneth Braswell. They you need to meet him. He's a great individual. He's somebody that they felt like that we would connect. And I too was an urban leaguer. I worked for urban. I did worked in the nonprofit world now for over 22 years. And when I moved here, I was just told I need to meet Kenneth, and I reached out to him, and I'll tell you, he was one. He still to this day was the one person that actually took the time out to meet with me when I came, and so I'm fortunate to be a part of his team.
Wonderful. For both of you, I'd love to get the remembrances of the first time you met each other. What was that like?
Well, the video of what you're seeing now is probably a good representation of how he showed up.
Okay.
Lurking outside of the door in the building and trying. But this is, this is really a measuring stick as to how our first meeting went. We met vibing with each other. We met laughing with each other. We met being serious. We met being passionate about the work. We met being visionaries about where we wanted to be. We met understanding the history that we both brought to the work and moving forward. And, I am more about, what I see in your heart as opposed to what I see on your resume when it comes to connecting with me and being a partner in this work I call Fathers Incorporated. And so those things were just a synergizing moment for the two of us. And I knew that he was going to be a part of our staff and a part of my vision and a part of this work. I just needed to figure out a way I was going to get him on board. And God did what he did. And, we're together doing this work.
Wonderful. Lawrence, he gave you a big up, so I hope you can match that.
Again, Kenny, first of all, he opened his door and me. But I remember sitting there, and this is the part that's ever going to be forever ingrained in my heart with him. He made a statement to me, and I said, I keep knocking on doors. I keep knocking on doors trying to find somewhere to land. And he said, after you knock once, don't knock again. He said, because you have a God that controls the door now. And when he told me that sealed the deal for me. And I remember sitting in the conference room, literally crying, and just meeting him, but sitting there crying because it was a meeting that I feel like was a complete godsend, and it was one of those meetings that changed the trajectory of my life. So that was our first meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you for both sharing, because for me, in my journey, I've come to the point that life is made up of decisions and moments. And it sounds like that the first time you met, you made a decision, a commitment to each other, that at that moment, you were going to find a way of working with each other and helping others and making it bigger than both of you. So I think that is wonderful. So let's get right to Black Dads Count, Ken. You're always a visionary in my book. So how did this one start?
Well, ironically, this started with the same synergy and energy that Lawrence and I are talking about. We were approached as an agency to look at doing some work with an organization here in Georgia called Fair Count that's actually run by Stacey Abrams. And so after her editorial run here in Georgia, she took up the fight to do two things. One is to look at voting in the state of Georgia and to make sure that every citizen in the state of Georgia had access to be able to vote, because a lot of things were going on in Georgia during the time of her gubernatorial race. I don't know if it was a national story. She was very adamant about not conceding to the governor, because there were literally counties throughout the state of Georgia that was locked out of voting. They were closing voting blocks. All kinds of things were going on. The second thing that she committed to was ensuring that every citizen, not only in the country, but more specifically in the state of Georgia, will be counted in the U.S. Census. Georgia is the second lowest response state of participation in the U.S. Census, particularly for Black families. Many of our southern counties below Atlanta have non-response rates as it relates to the census, and many pockets of communities in and around Metro Atlanta the same way. So when they approached us to look at what they call hard to count communities, these are communities that are either hard to locate, hard to convince, hard to communicate with, or hard to discern. I kind of said, no, that's not our work. That's a little mission drift for us. You know, we're focused on dads, not really in the general public. We're neither a mentoring organization or Black male achievement organization, although 99.9% of the clients we serve happen to be African American. We still don't align ourselves with that work. We believe that that's a very specific and different kind of work. And Lawrence, in that conversation, said, well, what about dads? And it's crazy because that is the phrase that I always throw out when I'm in meetings, whether we're talking about housing, substance abuse, health, whatever. When we go into a room, the question I always put on the table is, I hear y'all all talking, but what about dad? And he flipped it on me that day. And so I was like, didn't give that any thought. And then he said, we should call it something like Black Dads Count. And that kind of thing, when that seed is being planted, you recognize it the moment it comes. Again, it likens back to what he said about the first knock. My pastor in Albany, New York, Pastor Christina Staten, said to me before I moved to Atlanta, she was the one who actually planted that in my head by not knocking on a door more than once. And she said, the reason that you don't knock on the door more than once is because after they hear it the first time, now they're making a decision whether or not they're going to open the door. It's not necessary for you to knock again because they've already made a decision whether they're going to open the door or not. And so you don't need to expend energy in knocking a second time, using the energy that you would use to knock the second time to knock the first time on another door. And so it was that connecting conversation that really clicked for us. And then I just did what I do when God plants a seed in my heart like that. And the next thing you know, we're knee deep in relationship with the U.S. Department of U.S. Census Bureau nationally. And then here locally, we're working with Fair Count, and we're committed to doing the work.
Wonderful. Lawrence, it sounds like you're the person behind this idea. Lawrence?
So we're gonna hope he's fine.
Is he with us still?
There he is.
I don't know. I'm not sure what was going on. I was trying to take it off mute. You know, I don't. Yeah, I don't like to phrase it that way. I think what happened is, like Kenny said, it just everything. Energy in the room was we were all vibing. It was just a great conversation, and then so that's what happened. So I take no credit for it, but I'm glad to be a part of the movement.
Excellent. So can you mention different organizations like the Department of the Census Bureau? How did that relationship come into being?
Well, after we began to do the research on the work itself and see where we could settle in the work, one of the things we began thinking about was, because Fathers Incorporated is a national organization, whether or not we were going to use our bandwidth to really move a campaign to talk about this nationally, or really do the work more specifically on the ground in Metro Atlanta. And so we do these campaigns all the time. You know, I've done them over the years. We've had very little resistance with doing national campaigns and having people buy in to the work that we've done. Just this past September, we engaged again in the Million Fathers March. That was part of the Black Star Project, and Philip Jackson, may he rest in peace, gave that project to us to ask me to carry on his work in that space. And you know, over the last 2 years, we've had close to 180 cities engaged in the Million Father March. And then with the federal contract, we already have a national base. But what we wanted to do was be able to use the strengths that we had as an organization to inspire people outside of Metro Atlanta, and use the footprint and influence that we had in Metro Atlanta to really get on the ground and make a difference here in Atlanta. And so it was easy to then begin to look internally at our current partners, to look at the U.S. Census Bureau, become a national partner of theirs, to which we've come on and they've given us access to all the logos and the videos to change. And every time we call, they answer hard to answer questions. Just last night, we had a interview with a census representative. We're connected now with all of the community census groups here in the Metro Atlanta area. And so they've been great as a partner. And we've just been very narrowly focused on letting them know that the work is great and that we're all on board for hard to count communities. But we're in this space because we're primarily focusing on dads and their families.
Excellent. So is the scope of this campaign Atlanta and Georgia based, or is it national based?
So the campaign is nationally based, and so we now have partners that are coming in from around the country. We're still trying to discern how we're going to deploy them in other cities, but the real on the ground work right now is probably really moving fast here, because we do have boots on the ground. So what we're trying to do is to give everybody else a template on how to get on the ground in the same manner in their own cities and spaces. The good thing is that the census doesn't begin until April 1st. So we're still in the ramp up stage, right? We're still in, really getting all of our ducks in order, our T's crossed and our I's dotted, and creating the ecosystem that's going to allow everyone to be successful. We have a Facebook community that we started just to begin to bring dads into, so that we can start priming the pump in terms of educating them, informing them, and inspiring them to participate in the 2020 census. That group is now approaching almost 2,000 members. And we haven't even gotten to April 1st yet. And so we also have a fully functioning and comprehensive website, where you could go in and find all kinds of information, resources. You see, we got the swag and the logo, and we got the sweatshirts, and we got hoodies and T-shirts, and all of these other things, so that the messaging and the imaging can be in the front of us to really stimulate this conversation around Black Dads Count. And so all of that, and more, is part of really driving the effort nationally from a campaign perspective, and getting the word out to motivate others to do the work in their own communities, but then being able to be here in Atlanta and actually implement that work out.
Excellent. So before we go any further, I just want to shout out some people. Welcome Bobby, that's on the Get Vocal platform, and also Dre on the Get Vocal platform. Thank you so much for stopping by. Also on the Facebook Live end, Rodney Kellum is chimed in. Always a pleasure to have Rodney on the conversation. So let me ask, in regards to Black Dads Count, why is it important for Black dads to be part of the census?
Well, it's important because typically we're invisible in all aspects of family as it relates to engagement. And so, but more specifically to the census, in the 2010 census, African Americans in particular were undercounted by I believe the number is 3.9 million people. And so, what does that mean? It means that for every person, on average, $2,400 to $3,500 are left on the table unallocated to their communities per year. And so you take that average, you take the say the lower end, you take 2,400 and you times it by $3.9 million. That's how much money our communities are leaving on the table every year because they're not engaging in the summit. And then you multiply that by 10, and now you see a much larger number that becomes a significant number for low income communities time, across a decade, that cannot be changed until the next census. And so, of that cohort, of the African American hard to count cohort, Black men in particular are the hardest to count within the Black community. And so we thought it was and would make sense, as opposed to just going after Black men in general, to really go after Black dads, right? Because Black dads are connected to families, right? And they may not be connected to families always by being married, always by being in the same household, always by being completely present, but they are attached to their families. And so we just thought that because that was part of our mission, that we would really go after trying to touch Black dads in particular and really emphasize this notion of civic engagement, right? And so, on one hand, when we are saying Black dads count today, that is a message that is resonating with the work that we're trying with the US Census. But it also is a terminology that resonates with voter registration. It also resonates with dads joining the PTA. It resonates with dads being mentors. It resonates with dads having custody and being involved in the lives of their children. And all of the evidence, the negative evidence that we spew so often to determine and speak about Black dads should be from the opposite end, which is the asset end that says that dads do count. And the reason that they count is because of all the great things that happen when they're engaged in the lives of their children. And so it's a message that allows us to really move a campaign to expand this conversation and notion that Black dads do count. They count in their families, they count in the census, they count in voting, they count in the lives of our children, they count in the lives of children's moms, the children's families, their community, their churches. They count everywhere, right? But if we can use the census as a mechanism to move that message, but then galvanize them into an ecosystem that we can speak to them beyond the census, then we've done a great thing.
Right. So I just want to shout out here on the Get Vocal platform. Bobby is saying here, I'm applying for a census supervisor position in my community. All races counted. I do hope I get the position, which is very important. Um, I'd like to ask then too, when you approach a Black father who has not registered, what reasons, if any, are they giving you why they haven't done it in the past?
That is a excellent question. And then I will comment to something that Bobby said, because we often get hit with this notion that all lives matter and all fathers matter and all everybody matters, and that may be true. But when you ask my son will tell you there's only one dad that matters, and that's me. And so when I'm looking at a community of individuals that are at the lower end of the spectrum with respect to resources in those communities and with respect to engagement in those communities, and 99.9% of those individuals happens to be Black, in my space, in my community, and in my circle, Black dads matter for me. And so they may matter all for everybody else, but for me, in the work that I do, the calling that I have, that God has put on my life to do this work, I'm very intentional and unapologetically focused on a cohort of dads that look like me. And so I just needed to say that because, I actually had to even tell my son, because he wears the sweatshirts and he wears the hoodies, and he hasn't been hit with the question yet. But my response to him is that anyone ever says that to you, this is your response. not to me. My dad is the only one that matters and counts to me. And so, and you have the ability to say that. So now that I've
Covered that. Yep.
now that I've covered that, um, it's interesting, right? Because these guys are suspicious not only of the U.S. Census, but they're suspicious of all governmental activities because of the historic involvement that Black men in particular has had with governmental entities. And so you take, for example, the things that they've been conditioned to do because of some of the circumstances in their lives, right? And so the criminal justice system, where they've been marginalized, highly despaired, disproportionately sentenced in the courts, those kinds of things, and they happen to be a governmental entity. So when you say that the census is also a governmental entity, they believe that those two things are in relationship. And so you have to help them understand that no, the census is not the corrections. Census is not the IRS. The census is not child support. There is actually a law that prohibits and makes it illegal for the US Census to share any information that they receive from its citizens with any other federal agency that exists, any, including the FBI, including ICE, including the IRS, including all of them. And so every citizen in this country gets to understand that their information is private when it comes to the census. And then there are things that the census don't ask, right? That they believe that the census is going to ask on the form. Like the census, if the census doesn't have and ask you for your social security number and identifying factors that would give someone the ability to be able to identify who you are. And so with them, their biggest thing is this apprehension about engaging with anything that is associated with the government. And then my last example is if you look at particularly Black communities and you look specifically at Black dads as it relates to voting, they often have this thought process that my vote doesn't count. And if they believe that my vote doesn't count, and they also believe that my voice doesn't count, then how am I supposed to believe you that me filling out this 10-page census form is going to count? And so you have to get above all of those things with them in order to get them to understand that what you're doing is you're doing the same thing that the 1897 3/5 compromise was designed to do when they said that you were only 3/5 of a man. That compromise was designed to ensure that slaves were not counted as full value humans so that slave owners could have a tax break on their taxes. And so today, even though that's not in place, and no one has to put in a law that says you're only worth 3/5 of a man, even though no one is doing that, by the pure action of you not voting and you not applying to the U.S. Census, is doing the same thing that compromise was designed to do: keep you undervalued, undermeaning, and undervoiced. And so we're perpetuating something that was created for us some 400 or 500 years ago that we are still perpetuating ourselves today.
Excellent. Are there any fathers that you approach and say no?
Yeah. And so you get those guys that are just, they ain't trying to hear nothing. There's a conspiracy under every rock for them. you know, it don't matter what you bring to them. They got something to say about it. We had a guy the other day in one of the barbershops. Lamont was telling me about him. And he said he went into the shop and they were talking about, so we have these forums that we're doing called Statistically Speaking, where we're going into barbershops and just having candid conversations in barbershops around Black men, and based on dispelling and debunking myths for them. And so the interesting thing, about these guys are that they, in terms of the statistical piece, is they have bought so much into the negative stereotypes of themselves that it's hard for them to hear the truth And when they hear the truth, they want to debate it. Their first instinct is to debate the truth. And it's ironic because they don't have a basis for their own truth, right? So when you say, where'd you get that from? Nah, I heard that, bro. I heard it on TV. Where? With who? Like you could back them into a corner and they don't have ability to be able to answer those questions. And so not as much as you would think. I always tell people when it comes to barbershops, we have a program called Real Dads Read where we plant libraries in barbershops throughout Metro Atlanta. And I remember when we started the program, people were saying to me, why would you want to put books in the barbershops? They don't read anyway. And I was like, well, if I was dumb enough to listen to that, I probably wouldn't engage in this program.
Right.
Secondly, I will say to you that barbers are probably some of the most articulate, logical, educated people that I've ever met outside of measuring that education up against college degrees. I'm talking about guys who are just learned, right? They may be a little off base with their logic sometime and why they believe in something, but you're always going to get a stimulating conversation out of them. They're always going to be willing to seek knowledge. And so I see those as opportunities. We go into those spaces and, we hope that we get full agreement from many of them who are in the shops. But where we don't get full agreement, we have great conversation.
And I agree with you because a good barber is a great listener.
Yes, absolutely.
And definitely when it comes to black men, if you develop relationships with men who run or work in a barber shop, you get the window of black men in that community.
Absolutely.
So
I used to say that, barbershops, you think about this, between Friday night, between Friday afternoon and between Friday afternoon and Saturday evening in the barbershop, every guy in the community comes through those doors, from the pastor of the church down the block to the thug who just killed somebody the night before.
true.
And ironically, inside the barbershop, they all get along. Like there's
Yeah.
no distinguishment of professions, people, ideas, any of those kinds of things. It's just a bunch of guys in the barbershop in what we always call the black man's country club, right? We go in there, we vibe, we understand, we talk our own philosophies, we talk about our sports teams, we debate, we do those things. It's not until we cross the threshold back into the world that those things begin to matter to them again. It's one of those things that I've always wanted to do some research around to kind of really understand why is that the case.
Interesting. That's very true. I 100% agree with you. It, how has the many years that your organization has done many different initiatives made doing this easier for you? Because it could be difficult, like a brand new organization delving into this,
Mhm.
I think would be very, very challenging. I know it's still challenging for your organization, but the evaluated experience that you've had in running different opportunities have been probably a godsend to make this one come to fruition.
Mhm. For us, and again, I've been in social work for now 30 years and had Fathers Incorporated for 15 years. And when I started Fathers Incorporated and really began to do the work that I'm doing, I wanted to really make sure that um, we always found ways to relate to the people that we were trying to serve and to bring our own experiences to the table and to bring our own truths and our own vulnerabilities to the table so that people could relate to who we are and why we wanted to do what we do. And that's also one of the reasons that I stay primarily connected to Black dads. It's the most comfortable space for me to be in because A, that's who I am, B, that's how I was brought up, and C, it's what I know. And so there are other cultures of men that we work with that I'm not so comfortable in working with because I don't have a breadth of knowledge and understanding exactly how they filter this conversation around being masculine and being a father and being men, right? And so you look at the Latino culture, right? vastly different, or not maybe vastly different, but very different when you compare the two, and the Native American culture, right? And the Caribbean culture, and the African culture, the European culture, the Asian culture, the Eastern culture. Very different when it comes to connecting this conversation of manhood and fatherhood together, and could get very dicey when you're walking in trying to take my African American Southern culture into a room of people who don't look like me and hoping that they relate to me. And you can see the disconnect. And so don't get me wrong, there are proven methods and research and all those things that you can bring to the table, and you can work with all men. And we do. But what I recognize is that you can do that surface work in those spaces, but if you really, really, really want to get deep into a man's soul, that man is going to want to be able to relate to you on all levels before he releases himself to
Yeah. Fantastic. I just want to shout out on Periscope a gentleman who I've not heard from in a long time, Khalil Cumberbatch,
you.
who's doing great social justice work in New York. And I'm actually, Khalil, if you give me permission, I'll link you up with Kenneth, because both you are, I respect highly. And Khalil does incredible work in regards to social justice in the area of prisoners
Hmm.
and those who have come, those who were past incarcerated. He was incarcerated himself, and he's an incredible dad. So if I get both your permission, I'd love to have you be introduced to each other, and maybe Ken, if you can find a way of maybe expanding the Black Dads in movement,
Mhm.
Black Dads Count movement in New York.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely.
Fantastic. That's great. Uh, what have when you sit down and chat with these fathers, are you finding out anything new? Do they feel like it's wow, someone's finally taking some time to listen to my story?
Yeah,
How appreciative are they?
yeah, they do. I think that, and particularly when you have them in groups, I think what happens when you're working with these dads, and this is across the board, these dads begin to find out that there is a atmosphere forming around them that is a safe space. And in that safe space, they can find that all the things that they've been going through, they're not alone, right? That other people have dealt with the same things, have gone through and gotten through issues that are really burdening them now and gotten them into that sunken place that they're in. And so, we have a technique to get guys to that vulnerable place that we use in our workshops and even in our brief conversations. And it works all the time. And so, particularly and in general, when you're talking to men, men won't necessarily communicate with each other until one of them asks a question, right? And
Mm,
once they ask a question, then that person will answer the question, and there might be a short conversation that moves from there. But what opens them up a little bit, and even when they're answering questions, they won't typically reveal their morals and values. And so, in order to do that, you have to pose questions in a way that tests their inkling of what their morals might be, right? And so, a question, for instance, would be on the first date, or the man should pay for the first date, right? Yes or no, true or false. No on the fence, no on the line, true or false. And whether they say true or whether they say false tells you a little bit about them. It tells you a little bit about what their upbringing might have been. It tells you a little bit about where they've learned their values from, how they've learned their values, and those kinds of things. And so it opens them up a little bit. The third stage is what we call story leaders, and that is posing a question that moves beyond the value statement and now moves into the transparency space. And so the transparency space is a question that sounds like, um, tell me about the relationship that you had that broke up that really made you feel negative about yourself. But in order to answer that question, you got to tell me a story, right?
right.
And you got to tell me an intimate story. By the time you get guys, and you know this, by the time you get guys in a room telling stories, you have some intimacy,
Oh yeah.
right? You have some serious intimacy, and people and guys won't get into that storytelling unless they're comfortable in the space and they're comfortable with who's talking. And so when you're working with these dads and you walk them and we walk them through that process and they get to begin to release these stories and now they become comfortable with revealing more and more of those themselves. Over the course of 10 weeks, if you're working within a curriculum like ours over 10 weeks, by the time you get to week 10 and we start talking about graduation and it's all over with, they're like, what? Wait a minute,
Yeah.
you know, this is over?
Exactly.
Right. They're trying to figure out how to stay together because that comfortable space in that environment has been the safe space for them to be able to say what they feel, say what they are thinking, and not be judged by it. And
Mhm.
also be given advice and given scenarios and to help them break through some of the things or bad thinking that they may have, about whatever the situation may be. And so, yeah, they come to the table, a little apprehensive at first because I don't know you, you don't know me. And so, but it takes those kinds of techniques to be able to kind of understand how men communicate, particularly as individuals, but more importantly, communal, and how you have a conversation that gets them to those vulnerable spaces.
It's interesting you mentioned about the safe space, and I'll just interject with a quick story, and I can continue it offline with you. A few weeks ago, I had the honor and pleasure to be invited by the government of the Northwest Territories
Mm,
to help them with their service delivery to families in their family services department. They asked me to come in and talk about fatherhood.
mhm,
And there was a gentleman who was one of the co-facilitators over the 3 days, and he introduced it saying that we want to make sure that you have a safe and brave space.
mm.
And I'm always hearing the safe space, but when I heard a safe and brave
Okay.
space, that resonated in my head.
Mhm.
That really resonates. So whenever I'm facilitating now, I'm going to steal that from. He gave me permission to say, I want my fathers to know that it's a safe and brave
Right,
space.
absolutely, because it takes courage, to put yourself
Yes.
on the table, right? You just don't walk into a room and put your business, on the
No.
table and not have some level of courage to do that. And so, yes, it is a brave space. It's a brave space, from that perspective where, you have guys coming in and, some of those things that they're putting on the table, they've been holding for a long, long time in a locked box inside of themselves and have hidden it from the world. And now you got them in this workshop and you're talking about finding that lockbox, but then giving them the courage to dig down inside of themselves to pull that lockbox out, put it on the table, and open it up for everybody to see. Yes, it takes bravery and courage to be able to do that. But if they do, you have just hit upon a transformative moment.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, have any of the political parties taken notice of this initiative?
No, I stay personally stay away from politics.
Good.
So, it, ain't no future in politics. And so, uh, I'm just about doing the work. I'm just about making sure that dads, are equipped and have the capacity to be the best dads they can be for them for their families. And politics ain't got nothing to do, with that. Sure, capacity and all those other things can be impacted by that. I'm beginning this new series in another couple of months called The Resilient Man. And so, where I'm going to be really doing some work around helping men understand that the most successful quality and characteristic that they can have in their toolbox to be a great dad is resiliency. And so, what I do know about the political parties as it relates to the work supported by governments is that both Democrats and Republicans understand the importance of family. And so they may understand it from a different perspective, but they both recognize that family is key, which is why the grants and the monies that come from the federal government has been consistent and with no change, with no positive or negative change. It's been the same over the last 15 years. Has been the same all the way back to Bush. I mean, it started with Bush, it went to Clinton, it started with it then moved to Bush Jr. It went through Obama, and now here we are with Trump. And the emphasis that the federal government has put on doing something that would assist fatherhood and healthy relationships over time has remained the same. And so, from a political point of view, with respect to that, they both understand that. Now, the way they both look at it might be a little different for this person and that person, but the great thing is that at least on this particular subject, they meet in the middle.
Nice, very nice. Um, just out of curiosity, who's the youngest father that you've approached age wise, and who's the oldest father you've approached?
The oldest I know, the youngest I might not. Oh no, I do know the youngest. I do know the
Okay,
And so the youngest was a guy, a kid here in where was he? No, he was in New York. And so the
okay.
youngest kid that we had was 13 years old.
Wow.
Fortunately, he was in a juvenile facility. He was 13. I met him in the juvenile facility in New York. And we were doing programming when I ran the New York State Fatherhood Initiative. And we used to go into facilities and do programs in the facilities. And one of the facilities, or three of the facilities that we did work in, were the juvenile facilities. And this little kid walks in one day, and I'm looking at him like, "You're in the wrong class. Like, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Are you a dad?" He goes, "Yeah." I'm like, "How old are you?" And I remember him. I mean, he was a. I mean, my son is 11, so he's only 2 years. He was 2 years older than my son, and he had a child, and so and he was in juvie, and I was like, "Yo, how long? How long you have to go? They're not supposed to talk about the length of time that they're incarcerated and those kinds of things, but it kind of sent shockwaves through me to see someone that young having children and being incarcerated and looking like me. That was something that really shook me. And to know that there were even younger boys in that facility that were not dads, but younger boys up to 10, I mean, as low as 10 years old with orange jumpsuits on, right? That and when I saw that, it broke my heart when I saw that we were literally incarcerating children in the state of New York. Don't know if that's still the case, but this was some 10, 15 years ago. And then the oldest one was actually here in Atlanta. The oldest one was actually he was he was 62.
Okay.
He was 62. And so you would ask, like, what brought him to a fatherhood class? Well, he had two young kids. He had a 2 year old and a 6 year old. He was 60 some odd years old, and he was a single parent.
Wow.
He had custody of both of his boys. And we had a laughing moment where I said to him, I said, "You wish you hadn't taken that blue pill, huh?" Twice, twice. You wish you hadn't taken that blue pill. And he started laughing. I said, you're laughing. I said, but it's serious. It's amazing, how many people, in that age bracket are having children for the either the first time or the last time, where, you got guys that are 55 and 50, 55, 60, 65 years old, popping those pills and getting women pregnant much younger than they are and having to take care of those children. One of the biggest challenges for him in our classes were to get him to understand that the way he was brought up as a son was not the way that was going to work with his son, and so that he was no longer in a do as I say, not as I do society with respect to children. And there was no longer this wild, wild west discipline space that you can get in by just beating your kids into submission. There's a 1-800 number for that, and they taught that number from preschool all the way through, and they have no fear about using that number if they have to. And PCS or ACS or whatever it is in your state has no problem with coming in and snatching those kids up, from you. And so that was the hardest thing to get through to him, that, he needed to, you said, barbers are the best listeners in the world. That was one of the things that we had to get through to him, that being a successful dad today with these children demands that you become a great listener, and that
Mm.
you have an open mind to being able to explore and understand that they are in a totally different world than you are, and the consequences for their decisions today are much graver than the consequences as a 60-year-old had when he was going to school. I always tell the story, when I was going to school, the most I ever had to worry about was maybe getting into a scuffle with somebody and coming back home with a scratch either on my arm or on my face, or maybe even a bruise or black eye. That was the worst of my fears. But today, these kids are literally in fear of their lives going to and from school, depending on what communities they live in. In Chicago, they say that the number one fear of high schoolers in Chicago is coming home, not being able to come home alive. And so think
Mm.
about that. That's a
Yeah.
very different world than what we grow up in, and definitely has to be a very different way of parenting those children when you know that the consequences for their decisions have so much more graver consequences on their lives than what we had growing up ourselves.
Wow. Has this initiative, or has this initiative brought anything new to you when it comes to the state of the Black father in America?
It's interesting because, now that I'm doing this Black Dads Count work, it's making me like really look at areas that I had not looked at before, because I've been so narrowly focused on trying to ensure that they're great fathers, and begin to look statistically at who they are and what they're doing in all areas of their lives. And so there are these stats that I'm reading, and there's this great book that I'm reading now by Dr. Ivory Tolson called "No BS," no black, no no bad stats. And he was on my show a couple of weeks ago, really talking about how we have to pay more attention to the reality of statistics and researchers around Black families, and more specifically Black fathers, than we've ever had to do in the past, because there's so many myths out there about who we are that we have just blindsidedly believed, as opposed to doing our research. I wrote something today in a post that I did, and I said, we're in a society today where fact is fiction and fiction is a way of life. And so we just live by whatever is made up in society, and we hold that as truth. And we cannot do that any longer. And so this Black Dads Count work has actually opened up my ability to be able to not only speak to the capacity that I want to build for them as individuals, but the capacity that I want to build within them to be the great fathers that they can be for their families and their community. And so it has broadened my scope a little bit to begin to start thinking about their integration with their families, and not to solely just think about fathers, but to also think about how they impact the people that they are surrounded by, and to be able to begin to have a conversation around all of the areas of life to which they count, and also to be able to be very clear and understanding about the importance of engaging civically, right? And so I've never had to have that conversation, or I've never had that conversation with dads before, but now I'm beginning to have a little more understanding that civic engagement is important for dads just as it is for anyone.
As we start to wind down here, Fathers Incorporated does a lot of great work, but I just looking at this initiative. Did you not have to get additional capacity on board to do this project? Because you're a busy organization as it is. did you not? I just think that you have to get more people on board. You have to get more soldiers out in the fields, correct?
Yeah, so we're stretched right now. If you're a funder out there and you have a few dollars laying around that you're looking to do something with, pass them on down to us. We'll do good work. We'll generate great outcomes for you. But we're actually blessed in two partners actually coming to the table and giving us a little bit of money to get started and to get moving. And hopefully that money will attract more money. And so the United Way of Greater Atlanta, who is one of the partners of the census, gave us a little bit of money to get things ramped up that allowed us to build a website, create logos, marketing, graphics, print postcards, posters,
Yeah.
all those kinds of things to get our messaging moving out there. And then the Walton Family Foundation has also granted us some money to begin to look at some curriculum that we're creating that we're actually going to begin moving into some of the partners that we're working with in Atlanta. And then the United Way came back with another gift to us, another
Oh,
grant to us to really begin to work in specifically the hard to count communities that we're going into to work with the census. So now not only are we going into those communities to increase the participation in the census, but we're also going into those communities and bringing some curriculum in so that we can start working with those families. And those things have opened up doors for us where we're having conversations with mayors and council people and county officials and other businesses on how they can help support us doing a deeper body of work that we're doing here in Atlanta. So while we may be a little stretched right now with resources and staff to do everything I want to do, I'm optimistic that those resources will eventually show up.
what is your big dream for Black Dads Count?
So I actually have a big dream. One would think I don't have a big dream, but I actually do have a big dream. So the big dream for me is that, particularly in this ecosystem, this virtual community that we have, particularly that we're building for the national scope of work, that by the end of the year, we are approaching a 500,000 people in that ecosystem, or 500,000 dads in that ecosystem. Right now, like I said, we're closing in on 2,000, but I know that with the just today, um, I had this as an idea, did not pull the trigger on it, decided to something happened today that actually made me speak it out loud and started it had actually started the engine rolling. And so I've been having this idea about creating what I'm calling Black Dads Count ambassadors. And so those Black Dad Count ambassadors would be high social media influencers, whether they be celebrities or athletes or bloggers or other people with a lot of influence to help us move our message into their own networks. And so they would have light work, which is to do what you already do, but periodically mention Black Dads Count and have Black dads that are in your circles come into our site. And so this morning when I woke up, Griff, who is the co-host of Get Up Mornings with Erica Campbell, I actually know Griff here in Atlanta. And when we did the hoodies, I sent him one of the hoodies. He sent me his size and I just sent it to him. And this morning when I got up, he was talking about Black Dads Count on um, Instagram and he had on the hoodie as he was talking.
Yeah, I saw the post.
And I was like, whoa, okay. So I texted him and said, yo, bro, thanks so much for doing that. And he was like, nah, I'm all in. Let me know what you need. He's like, Erica loves the work that you're doing. We want to use because their show is national. He's like, I want to use the show to like really help, move the needle. He says, I'm actually um, starting tomorrow. I think it's Friday. They're starting Fatherhood Fridays on their show. And so where they're going to be talking about fathers, on Friday. And so as a result of that, now I'm having to go back and actually formalize Black Dads Count Ambassadors Initiative, because there's several other folks that I've talked to that want to be ambassadors as well. And so my really big dream outside of the ecosystem being 500,000 people by the end of the year, it is to really have these high level influencers come on board to actually move the needle to inspire others to do more in this field of work. I don't care if you contribute to Black Dads Count. You can start your own thing, but if you do, at least I stimulated your thought process to create something new and to hit an audience that I may never touch.
Well, if you need an international ambassador that has an audience in the U.S., count me in.
Okay. Okay.
Count me in.
Okay.
Count me in. I'm more than I'm very passionate about this and very passionate about the work your team does. So anything that I can do to help the cause,
Mhm.
count me in.
Absolutely. As soon as I get it together, you'll be
Yep.
hearing from me.
No problem. Well, I know that you have a family and you do have another life. So I just want to say, any last words you'd like to share about Black Dads Count or Fathers Incorporated, or anything you'd like to share with Black dads and those who love them?
Yeah, no, I would just say, listen, if you want to know really what it is we're trying to do and where you can find information, go to our website. I've spent a lot of time in building that website at www.blackdadscount.com. Everything you want to know about the work, every piece of information that you need to know about the census and more specifically about Black dads, you can find there. Encourage people to go to the website because in addition to doing all of that on the website, you can actually find your way right into the Facebook group and join the Facebook group, and then you can get some of this great merchandise, right? And so
There we go.
represent us out there. I love the reactions that we get when we're out in the community, when people see Black Dads Count and they're asking questions like, yo, what is that? What is that? How can I get in? How can I become involved? And so, it's not so much about selling a lot of merchandise. It is just about moving the brand. And so that people can be excited about putting it on. We also have one gentleman that just came on board as an ambassador before we called him an ambassador. um, Lynn Lynn Bolden. Lynn Bolden was the wideout for the Kentucky Wildcats, and so he is getting ready to go into the 2020 NFL draft. And so his company actually created a fundraiser for us that is connected to his involvement at the NFL Combine next week.
Wow.
So what they're doing is people are actually pledging to his bench pressing. And so he's committed 12 reps to Fathers Incorporated. And he has people bidding, not bidding, but pledging to the reps. And so for every rep he does on the bench press, Fathers Incorporated gets $1 from the
Nice.
person. And so when I looked at it today, people are signing up and coming on board. So I don't know what it's going to mean for us in the end, but he asked me to send him two shirts, a sweatshirt and a T-shirt. And so my thought and my hope is that at the NFL Combine, he will be wearing a Black Dads Count T-shirt, and that will stimulate others to want to know what it is. So.
Well, speaking of which, how was hanging out at the Super Bowl, young man? I saw some pics of you hanging out at the Super Bowl.
So that was part of my federal work, the federal grant. But we've had the pleasure of going to the Super Bowl the last 2 years and being on Radio Row or being in the media center. And so the cool thing about us being in the space is that typically when the athletes and celebrities come through the space, they're coming through to talk about either something they're promoting or football and the Super Bowl. But when they come to our booth and they come to our space, we're talking about fatherhood, football, and family. And so it's a really great departure from what they're so used to talking about when they come to
Right.
the Super Bowl. So, this year I was able to touch two of my giant heroes. Last year, I had the opportunity to meet Saquon Barkley and had a few minutes talking to him. But this year, I met the two individuals that were responsible for the 4 New York Giants Super Bowl rings.
Lawrence Taylor, LT was one of them. I saw that picture. I
Yeah,
saw that picture.
yeah. But I met Lawrence, but I met Phil Sims. So I was able to get his
Yes.
hand because he brought us the first two rings. And I
Yes.
met Eli Manning at the Bar Star
Oh,
Breakfast. So I was able to touch the individuals that delivered the 4 of our Super Bowl rings, including the man Lawrence Taylor, uh,
wow.
and others. And so that was for me, that particular one was a great one to be at. But I've met some, really other some just great people in the space that weren't as top A-listers as those guys were, at least in my space. But got a chance to, talk to people like Shannon Sharp and talk to
Yep.
Chris Bouchard and spoke to didn't get a chance to speak to Russell Wilson. They was whisking him past us. Cam Newton, whisked past. There was just so many people in the space. And next year that we go, we're looking to kind of have a greater presence in the space, working with the NFL to do something different with them to really promote this whole notion of fatherhood in the NFL. So we're hoping and looking for bigger things next year.
Well, congratulations. It's Kenneth Braswell. He wears many hats. Fathers Incorporated, Real Dads Read, now Black Dads Count.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like all over the place. And I'm sure in the next few weeks something else will
Nah,
happen.
nah.
Not.
I'm done
No.
this year. We've made a commitment this year.
Okay.
As count is going to be it because the census goes all the way up until October. And so
Right.
we do have our normal things that are in there that you'll hear us talking about, the Real Dads Read, particularly Million Fathers March as we get closer to the end of the year, but nothing new. We're going to stay grounded in Black Dads Count for a minute. And then also for your listeners who don't know, this is a piece of information if you're actually in the fatherhood space. OFA, or the Office of Family Assistance, and HHS released the forecast for the fatherhood grants coming out this summer, or supposedly coming out in the next 30 days. And so if you are someone who's out there who's really been looking to do fatherhood work and looking for grants in particular, the grantees that they've had in the past 5 years are sunsetting in September. And so a whole new crop of grantees will be in place by October. And so if you go to grants.gov and type in fatherhood grants, those grants will pop up. And they are sizable grants. I think they're going to be picking, I think when I looked at the forecast, 60 grantees that are either focused on fatherhood or healthy marriage. The floor on the grants is 800,000, and the ceiling on the grants are $1.5 million.
Wow.
Year over 4 years. And so, if you're looking to really, really get into this work, this is the prime opportunity to get some serious, But if you're not doing comprehensive fatherhood work and you're not doing case management and evaluations and outcomes, and you just got a Facebook page, or you just got a website, or you just hawking some t-shirts, that this is not for you. You're not gonna
Exactly.
It's not for you. This is for someone who is really trying to move a social service entity to really engage. Now, what it does mean for, if that is you, to partner with others who might be thinking about applying for those grants and figuring out how you can get in a small way so that you can learn the business. To be honest with you, that's how I learned how to get into this. I mean, I cut my teeth in the state of New York, actually managing grants, fatherhood grants. So I understand it from both sides. I understand it from managing grants, and I understand it from being on the opposite side of grants. And it's not easy doing comprehensive fatherhood work. It sounds exciting, and it sounds like it's
a lot of work,
but it is nothing easy about working with
No.
fathers in this space. And you will stay up a lot of nights trying to figure out how you're going to accomplish your outcomes.
Good stuff. And for those who don't know, I work in the fatherhood space in Canada. Actually, I work at the only father-focused family center in all of Canada. So let that simmer.
Yeah.
Let that simmer. And I always, when I share what I do with people, I always start with that, and I just don't say anything else for about 30 seconds and let that marinate with the audience.
Yeah, and
So
you know what happens is they watch your Facebook post and they think you're having a great time out there. You see is I tell people all the time, when you look at my Facebook page, all you're seeing is the highlights. You see the 3 seconds that I stop to take a picture with Eli Manning. What you have not seen is me getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, preparing for the day, moving people, moving equipment, getting into the space, settling down, trying to track down people, interviewing them, thinking about what you're going to ask them, interviewing them for 7 to 8 hours straight, leaving
yep,
out of that space at 6 o'clock that evening, going out to grab something to eat and get off of your feet, going to bed at 10 o'clock that night, only to wake up at 5 o'clock the next morning for 4 days straight. That post you don't see,
of course not.
right? But you see the next day me taking a picture with Lawrence Taylor, and it's like, oh, he's having fun. Yeah,
Huh,
no, I'm having a great moment.
right, right. We celebrate occasionally, we grind regularly.
Yes, I like that.
You know, you know. Well, again, thanks, Kenneth, for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule to share with us.
Mhm.
Um, Always a pleasure to stop you for an hour or so when you're on the treadmill, so to speak,
Right.
and looking forward to working with you and your organization whatever way I can. It is Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show. 2018 award winner in the innovation category given by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. This is the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations. If you want to find out more about the Dr. Vibe Show, where you can listen to it, post, etc., best place to go to is my website, the drvibeshow.com. As always, I like to end off my conversation with this: live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions and then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Would like to thank again Kenneth, Lawrence, Bobby, who was on for most of the conversation, Dre, Rodney. There were a few others that jumped in. If I don't remember, it's because of my head, not my heart.
Mhm.
Remember, you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. If you're around tomorrow evening, which is February 20th, I have MJ Durkin, and we're going to be having a conversation about men and vulnerability.
Mhm.
And then on Sunday night, Robert Leong will be on, and he'll also be talking about men and vulnerability. God bless, peace be well, keep the faith, and good night, everyone. Thanks for watching or listening live or on the replay.